and welcome to Fireside Chats with Longwood University faculty. Today, my name is Brent Roberts, and I am the Dean of Greenwood Library at Longwood. And today we are blessed to have a conversation with Kevin Schattenkirk-Harbaugh. Welcome, Kevin. Kevin is an honors faculty scholar in the Cormier Honors College for Citizen Scholars here at Longwood University. Kevin is an ethnomusicologist. Actually, maybe that could be the question that we start with, Kevin. What is ethnomusicology anyway? Kevin earned his PhD at the University of Western Australia in Perth in 2018, and master's degrees in music history and ethnomusicology at the University of Washington. Go Huskies! Whoop, whoop, whoop. Should have worn my purple tie instead of my Longwood tie. All right. Kevin's research focuses on the social activism of gay men's choruses in the United States and their regular commissioning of new programs of music. He also explores issues pertaining to gender and sexuality in popular music. Kevin was born and raised in Seattle, another Washington boy, whoop, whoop, Evergreen State. Basically, I think what we're finding out, Kevin, is that we're basically the same person since I went to the University of Washington and grew up in Washington as well, except I did not get to live in Perth, Australia or Boston. Kevin has been at Longwood since fall of 2020 in his free time. He enjoys writing and recording his own music, working out, polishing his culinary skills, and getting outdoorsy. So, Kevin, welcome. It's great to have you. And let's start with that question. Could you tell us, what is ethnomusicology anyway?
I usually start day one with my students on this question. Basically, the ethno part comes from ethnography. And so I always describe it as a sort of cultural studies and music combined. So studying music cultures on a broad level. Yeah, cool.
That's awesome. Well, and that is what really piqued my interest when I saw in the Honors College newsletter about your research, that it lies at the intersection of social activism and music. I really like that, especially how gay men's choruses, specifically the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, were at the center of the early gay rights movement. So can you tell us about your research and how you originally got interested in that topic?
Oh, yeah. So just to be blunt, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I think like a lot of first-gen college students, I was kind of struck by this idea that I needed to do something that really proved that you know, I have some sort of intellectual capabilities, right? And so I was kind of searching in all of these different areas of popular music and so on. And when I sat down with my PhD advisor in Perth, a great guy named Jonathan McIntosh, I probably had come in one too many times talking about the Seattle Men's Chorus and how much I missed singing with them because I had only joined in 2008, sang with them for about 2.5 years before we moved to Australia. And so Jonathan looked at me and he said, you know, Kevin, you talk about the chorus a lot. Why don't you focus on that? So to be honest, to be perfectly honest about how I kind of fumbled about, that's actually how I landed on it. And I think what it really came down to was about passion. When I think back on some of my friends and colleagues actually who studied who basically studied what they studied, it was all about what they were passionate about. And so it took me a while to kind of get to that point. But to go back before that, I mentioned singing with Seattle Men's Chorus in 2008. And when I joined that group, I found myself really just in love with singing with that group, for one thing. And the type of community that it built, it's a big group, about 250 to 300 singers at any point in the season, and in the concert season. And I found myself really just wishing that I had joined years earlier. So that was a big instigator in, I think, pushing me toward the gay choruses as my area of research focus.
Great, great. And you talk a lot in your article and in your dissertation about how what those choruses did was a direct response to anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric and activism that was out there. And you talked specifically about the case of Matthew Shepard.
Yes.
Could you talk about that a little bit, about how these choruses responded to that anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric?
Oh yeah. To be honest, this actually goes back even to the way choruses responded to the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. There were a number of multi-movement works and songs that were commissioned in response to the AIDS epidemic, and then later on with Matthew Shepard, and then even later with Tyler Clementi, the Rutgers University student who had committed suicide about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of these cases, they will commission music that's really designed to appeal to us emotionally. And in responding to rhetoric and violence, a lot of this music frames the LGBT experience with discriminatory rhetoric and anti-LGBT violence in terms of appealing to us emotionally, sharing the experience of the singers on stage. And to a certain extent, that also includes incorporating elements of other people's stories, like singing about Matthew Shepard, for instance. There is a piece of music that has become really important to the gay and lesbian choral world, GALA choruses. The GALA is the Gay and Lesbian Association of Choruses, an international umbrella organization. One song that was really important to Matthew Shepard is a song called What Matters by a San Diego singer-songwriter named Randy Driscoll, that Craig Coogan, the current executive director of Boston Gay Men's Chorus, was really responsible for getting that song arranged for both female identifying choruses and male identifying choruses in the early 2000s, around 2002, 2004. And because he saw it as a reflection of the chorus's values for outreach and sharing the stories and experiences of LGBT people. But the song itself also lyrically appears to come from the perspective of Matthew Shepard, basically making an appeal to the listener about, yeah, this is who I am, but these are the similarities we share despite our differences. So it's really designed to kind of tug at the heartstrings a little bit. And the choruses have, at this point, there's not really a record anywhere of how many choruses have performed this song, but best that I've been able to find is over 20 different gay choruses have performed it in the time since. So it's something that gets passed around, and that's very common with a lot of other pieces of music that address the same or similar types of issues regarding rhetoric and violence.
Great. Sort of a recurring theme in your writings is the topic of affinities. So these connections or affinities between members of the choruses themselves, or between the choruses and audience members, and between the choruses and the heroes of the LGBT movement. Could you talk about how all of those affinities and those connections come into play in this whole process of social activism?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, just looking at the chorus itself as a group of people, you have, depending on the size of the chorus, certainly Boston, Seattle, and San Francisco are among the biggest. They've got about 300 active members. That usually whittles down to about, I'm guessing somewhere between 230 and 250 on stage by the time performance comes up. But you have a wide variety of people in terms of age, race and ethnicity, body shapes and sizes, gender identity. There is a lot more inclusion of transgender singers in the choruses, and sexual orientation. So not all singers in the groups are necessarily LGBT. There are heterosexual cisgender singers as well, allies, if you will. And so I think the idea of affinity there within the chorus is really important, because you have people who are very like-minded in terms of how they view the LGBTQ community, whether they're part of it or whether they're an ally. Everybody's kind of on the same page. There's also kind of a sort of gung-ho spirit to the choruses. You see a lot of people join for different reasons. For me, it was feeling like, wow, I'd just seen a show by Seattle Men's Chorus that looked a lot of fun. I should join after years of friends kind of trying to prod me to audition. But then there are singers who join who may have joined after they've just come out. So there's a little bit of kind of throwing yourself into the community to that extent. And in some cases, when older people have just come out, it's really kind of a chance to find a sense of community with other people who may have similar experiences with that as well, coming out later in life. And so many other reasons, but these are sort of like the, it's like the glue that brings everybody together. And because you have these shared values of wanting to perform music, they're entertainers as well. So you'll walk out of a chorus show being entertained, but hopefully thinking about some of the more serious music that's also being performed as well. So there's a real passion for that, the entertainment, but also the message, and presenting a positive representation of an LGBT organization. So then that kind of extends into how the choruses view their relationship with their audiences. Dennis Coleman, who was the director of Seattle Men's Chorus for years and retired a few years ago, once told a colleague of mine, Heather McLaughlin, that the choruses will never sing anything that will alienate their audience. So you won't walk out of a gay chorus concert upset by something that you've heard because it was so provocative. And they're really careful in how they address issues with their audiences because they respect that relationship. And this is where it really gets interesting, because a lot of the questions that I looked at in terms of social change and how it is affected in that extent is the question of, well, do the choruses just, quote, preach to the choir? And it's a little bit more complicated than that, because they focus so much on the relationship with their audiences. Often what will happen is you'll hear stories from other singers about estranged family members or friends or colleagues who decided to come to a show, right? And for whatever reason, they decided to buy a ticket and sit in the theater and watch a gay chorus show. And that led to discussion about whether it's an issue about marriage equality, or going back, marriage equality, don't ask, don't tell, or hate crimes. Just the fact that somebody chose to sit in the audience for a show was sort of an instigator for a conversation. So building affinity in that way with the audiences. And also with the heroes and martyrs of the LGBT movement, That gets right to the heart of the music itself. So singing music about Matthew Shepard or Tyler Clementi or anybody else who's been a victim of anti-LGBT violence, it's not just singing about their experience, not just singing about their story, but also to a certain extent, singing from our perspective, how we relate to the stories of Matthew Shepard and to the story of Tyler Clementi and so on.
So kind of what you're talking about in these conversations and these relationships, I think that kind of flows into the next question I had about social capital. That's another sort of recurring theme in your work. Could you talk about social capital, what it is? I've always been fascinated by this topic. How did that come into play in the work of these choruses that you've studied?
Well, I really have to credit Wendy Moy, who is a colleague of mine at Syracuse in music ed. I took a cue from her. She really looked at social capital in her study of Seattle Men's Chorus. I had left Seattle Men's Chorus by this point. I was in Australia when she did her work. But she looked at it in terms of the three different types of capital at play: bonding, bridging, and linking. And all of these elements reflect kind of what I was just talking about, really, the idea of bonding capital, looking at the ways that the chorus really becomes a cohesive unit, not just in terms of being musicians and entertainers, but socially as well. One of the things that often happens outside of the rehearsal space is that there are a lot of social functions that go on that are designed to really build the ensemble, not just as a performing unit, but also as a social unit as well. And so kind of what's really important here in terms of that is the way that bonding has really become significant as the choruses have diversified. So you don't just have gay men singing. You have a wide variety of people in these choruses, and the idea of creating that cohesiveness with people who have shared but different identities and values, it's really important to really kind of creating that cohesive unit. Bridging, excuse me, the idea of bridging capital is kind of, it serves a few different purposes in terms of engagement with the audience, which is something that Wendy Moy pointed out. Also, the building of a diverse chorus. As I mentioned earlier, I joined Seattle Men's Chorus after seeing a show. So sitting out there and watching the show and thinking, wow, that looks like a lot of fun, I want to join. And that's certainly, I'm certainly not the only one that has done that, right? I mean, there have been plenty of people who have joined. When I sang in Seattle and when I sang in Boston, certainly singers would join after having seen our performances. So, kind of that really kind of plays into the chorus's idea of outreach, or their value of outreach. So is attracting new singing members, but also, as Wendy Moy also pointed out, the idea of attracting donors and marketing the chorus to the community. Linking is kind of where the choruses actually sort of capitalize on their connections and building relationships out in the community with other LGBT organizations. Certainly during the AIDS epidemic, the choruses would often partner with other organizations that were focused on tending to people with HIV and AIDS. And those kinds of partnerships out in the community are not just limited to LGBT specific organizations, but other types of organizations as well. I believe in Seattle, the chorus had partnered with a cancer research organization. So really kind of building these positive ties in the community as well. So Yeah, social capital as a means of building the group, but also looking outward and into the community and how to be, part of the community.
Thank you. Well, this has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed hearing more about your research. Maybe one more question. What advice would you give others who might be interested in studying the impact of music on creating social change?
Oh, this is always kind of a tricky idea. I always kind of pose the question to my students, can music change the world? And that's a really hard question to answer because we know that music can change ourselves, right? We can hear a piece of music that might impact the way we feel or think about something. So one of the things that, two aspects that I would actually encourage people to focus on come out of my own work, which is really paying attention to the relationships within the ensemble. And what is that ensemble like as a unit? And how does the music reflect not just their values as an organization, but the singers' shared experiences? And how does that contribute to the group bond overall? And I'll try to be brief about this. One piece of music that I looked at was a piece called Testimony by Stephen Schwartz, which is a song that really looks at an older LGBT person's experience with self-destructive thoughts and suicidal ideation in their youth. And so by the end of the song, you hear that this is an adult who's reflected on their own experience. And by the end of the song, they've explained how they found some sense of contentment and acceptance of who they are. It's a really powerful song. As a researcher looking at how this piece of music was used by the choruses, it was very clear that it was an emotional piece of music. And there was certainly a lot to write about in terms of my own observations. But however, as a singer who has performed the song twice, it's a very different experience to actually stand on stage with 240, 250 people, all of whom relate to the song in some way, as I do to specific lines, and to have those words coming out of your own mouth is a very emotional experience. And there were performances where I lip synced certain lines because they were just too hard to sing. But then walking off stage and feeling the kind of bond that we all felt in singing such an intensely personal piece of music really seemed to create a kind of deeper relationship in the chorus. So that's something that I would actually encourage people to look at, is how those relationships in the ensemble are really fostered by the music itself. But also the relationship with the audience, and how the choruses, or how various ensembles or performers, how they view their audience and how they view their relationship with the audience. And what are they doing? Are they actually challenging the audience while respecting that relationship? Or what is their approach to their relationship with their audience? I would say that those are the two things that are really key to probably lending some insights into assessing the impact on instigating social change. I hope that
Great.
helps.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin Schattenkirk-Harbaugh, it has been wonderful chatting with you about your research. It's great to have you here at Longwood University, and thank you for being a part of this series of Fireside Chats with Longwood University faculty.
Great. Thank you so much, Brent. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.